In the grand theater of history, royalty was the ultimate performance. Kings and queens weren't just rulers, they were symbols of divine perfection, their bloodlines a sacred promise of strength and continuity. Their portraits show them tall and serene, their palaces were monuments to power, and their lives were chronicled as grand, unbroken stories of destiny fulfilled. It was a world built on image, where perfection wasn't just desired, but demanded. It was a fairy tale told to the world. But behind the gilded facade, in the forgotten corners of the palace, a different story was unfolding. A story of the smallest royals, whose very existence was a secret to be kept. This is the dark and often tragic fate of royal children born with dwarfism, whose lives were frequently erased from the history books and whose voices were silenced by the very families meant to court them. They were born into crowns but lived under shadows, their royal blood a curse rather than a blessing. Their stories are not fairy tales, they are heartbreaking accounts of secrecy, exploitation, and the devastating consequences of a world obsessed with a flawless image. To understand why a royal child born with dwarfism was often met with fear and secrecy, you have to understand the very foundation of monarchy itself. For centuries, the right to rule wasn't won by election, it was claimed by blood and ordained by God. The concept of the divine right of kings meant the monarch was not just a leader but God's chosen representative on earth. Their physical body was a reflection of this divine mandate. A king was expected to be strong, virile, and physically imposing, a warrior capable of leading armies, and a patriarch capable of producing a line of equally perfect heirs. In this rigid worldview, a child born with a visible difference like dwarfism wasn't just a family matter, it was a potential crisis of the state. It was seen as a crack in the sacred bloodline, a flaw that could be interpreted in the most terrifying ways. To the superstitious minds of the medieval and Renaissance eras, it could be seen as a sign of divine disapproval, a punishment for some hidden sin. It could be whispered about as evidence of witchcraft, or a dark omen hanging over the entire dynasty. This wasn't just about public relations, it was about a deep existential fear that the family's sacred right to rule was compromised. This fear was amplified by the brutal realities of succession. A male heir with dwarfism would have been almost universally deemed unfit to inherit the throne. In an age where a king's authority was often demonstrated on the battlefield, a monarch of small stature would have struggled to command the respect of his knights and nobles. The intricate armor, the heavy swords, the sheer physical presence required to dominate a room of ambitious lords, these were seen as essential tools of power. A prince with dwarfism, regardless of his intelligence, would have been perceived as weak, a target for rivals both within and outside the kingdom. His claim to the throne would have been perpetually challenged, inviting instability and civil war. This dynastic anxiety was so profound that the reaction was often swift and merciless. The most common solution was erasure. The child would be hidden from public view, their existence becoming a closely guarded secret. They were often sent away to remote country estates, isolated castles, or given over to monasteries and convents. Out of sight, they were out of mind. Official records were often left blank or altered to suggest the child had died in infancy. They were written out of the family story, their portraits never painted, their names never spoken at court. They became living ghosts, their royal heritage a source of shame rather than pride. While some of these hidden children may have been cared for with a degree of private affection, they were denied their birthright, their family, and their identity. They were the silent sacrifices made to uphold the illusion of a perfect, divinely sanctioned bloodline. We will never know how many royal children met this fate, their stories intentionally buried so deep that not even a whisper remains in the archives of history. For a select few royal children with dwarfism, their fate wasn't to be hidden away. Instead, they were kept at court, living within the opulent walls of the palace. But this wasn't necessarily a sign of acceptance. In many ways, it was a different and more public kind of prison, a gilded cage, where they were often stripped of their royal identity and recast as living curiosities for the amusement of the court. They weren't treated as princes or princesses, but as something closer to exotic pets or court mascots. Their role was to entertain, a source of novelty at lavish banquets. They were often dressed in miniature, elaborate costumes and paraded before visiting dignitaries. Their very presence served a strategic purpose. Standing next to a person of small stature, a king or queen would appear taller and more majestic, a visual trick to enhance their royal aura. Their humanity was secondary to their function as a prop in the grand performance of monarchy. Perhaps no story illustrates this tragic existence better than that of Jeffrey Hudson. Born in 1619, Jeffrey was, by all accounts, perfectly proportioned but extraordinarily small. At age 7, he was presented to the Duke and Duchess of Buckingham. During a grand banquet for King Charles I and his French Queen Henrietta Maria, the climax of the evening was a massive pie. As it was set before the Queen, the crust broke open, and out emerged little Jeffrey Hudson, just 18 inches tall, in a miniature suit of armor. The Queen was delighted, and the Duke and Duchess promptly gifted him to her. From that moment on, Jeffrey became the Queen's dwarf, a celebrated figure at the English court. He was given the affectionate, if demeaning, title of Lord Minimus. He lived a life of material comfort. With fine clothes and his own servants, he even appeared in a famous portrait by the court painter, Anthony van Dyck, standing beside Queen Henrietta Maria. But beneath this privileged life was a constant humiliation. He was a spectacle, an object of amusement. The internal turmoil this must have caused eventually boiled over. As the English Civil War raged, Hudson remained loyal to the Queen, fleeing with her to France. It was there in 1644 that he tried to assert his manhood. After being relentlessly mocked by a courtier named William Crofts, Hudson challenged him to a duel. Crofts arrived armed with a large water squirt, viewing it as a joke. But Hudson arrived on horseback with a pistol and shot his tormentor dead. This act of defiance was his undoing. While he had finally forced someone to take him seriously, dueling was illegal in France, and the victim was the brother of a powerful official. Though Queen Henrietta Maria intervened to save his life, she was forced to expel him from her court. His fate then took an even darker turn. While trying to return to England, his ship was captured by Barbary pirates, and he was sold into slavery in North Africa, where he spent the next 25 years. He eventually returned to England a broken man, dying in obscurity and buried in an unmarked pauper's grave. Jeffrey Hudson's life is a powerful indictment of the gilded cage. He had proximity to power, but was denied the one thing he craved most, to be treated not as a curiosity, but as a man. If life as a court curiosity was a gilded cage, there was an even darker level of exploitation in some of the most powerful courts of Renaissance Europe. People with dwarfism weren't just entertainers, they were treated as property, as commodities to be collected, traded, and even bred like prized animals. This practice reveals a chillingly transactional view of human life. People with dwarfism were actively sought out by royal agents. They were given as diplomatic gifts between monarchs, a way to curry favor or display wealth. A king might present another with a gift of a court dwarf, who would be torn from their life and transported across the continent. They were living ornaments, collected and displayed alongside fine art and exotic animals. The most disturbing manifestation of this mindset, though extremely rare, was the practice of enforced reproduction. Some rulers sought to create a continuous supply for their courts by forcing court dwarfs to marry and have children. with the explicit goal of producing more children with dwarfism. It was a grotesque attempt to control human genetics for entertainment and status. One of the most well-documented examples comes from the court of Isabella d'Este, the Marchioness of Mantua in 16th century Italy. A renowned patron of the arts, her letters reveal a disturbing obsession with collecting dwarfs for her court. Her fascination led her to arrange the union of members of her court staff, hoping they would produce a child with dwarfism. This resulted in the birth of a baby girl to a cherished court dwarf named Delia. But the birth was not a moment of joy for Delia. It was the beginning of a tragedy. The child was not seen as Delia's daughter, but as Isabella's property. Isabella had apparently promised years earlier to give a dwarf child as a gift to another noblewoman. The letters from Isabella d'Este discussing the matter are shockingly cold. She discusses the child's features and her potential for remaining small, appraising her value as a curiosity. There is no mention of the mother's feelings. The child doesn't even have a name in these letters. She is merely an object. One can only imagine the silent agony of Delia, forced to watch as her own child was prepared to be given away. She was powerless to object. Her daughter was torn from her arms and sent to another court destined to live her life as a gift. This story is a stark reminder of the absolute lack of agency afforded to these individuals. They were denied the most fundamental human rights, the right to choose a partner, and the right to raise their own children. Their bodies, their lives, and even their children were not their own. History is most often written by the powerful, and the voices of the marginalized are usually lost. It's incredibly rare to hear directly from a court dwarf, to read their own words about their life, but such a voice does exist. It belongs to Joseph Boruwoski, a Polish man whose memoirs provide an unprecedented window into this world. Born in 1739 to an impoverished noble family, it was clear from a young age that Joseph was a dwarf. A local noblewoman took him in and provided him with an education. Unlike many court dwarfs kept as simple amusements, Boruwoski was taught to read, write, and converse intelligently. He became an accomplished musician and a graceful dancer. His intelligence and charm made him a sensation in the courts of Europe, from Poland to Vienna to Paris. He met kings and empresses, including Maria Theresa of Austria. But even for a man as accomplished as Boruwoski, his life was defined by his stature. His memoirs are filled with the humiliations he endured. He recounts how nobles would debate his existence as if he weren't in the room, discussing him not as a man, but as a scientific anomaly. They would speculate on the reproduction of dwarfs, pondering if it were possible to create more people like him. He was, in these moments, reduced to a specimen. His memoirs reveal a man acutely aware of the role he was forced to play. He longed for a life of normalcy. In one poignant passage, he lamented that if he had only been of average size, he could have lived as a man, an honest man, a man of feeling. This captures the deep tragedy of his existence, the knowledge that his talent and humanity were forever eclipsed by his physical form. Unlike many, Boruwoski attempted to seize control of his own destiny. He fell in love with a woman of average height, Isabella Barbatin, and when his patron refused to permit the marriage, he left the court. He and Isabella married and had children, but the world outside the court wasn't much kinder. The King of Poland, who had once given him an allowance, withdrew his support. To support his family, Boruwoski was forced to exhibit himself, giving concerts where the main attraction was always his size, a profound humiliation for a man who had once conversed with empresses. He eventually settled in Durham, England, living until the age of 97 and publishing his memoirs to ensure his story was told in his own words. The history of royal children and court dwarfs is overwhelmingly a story of exploitation. Yet, To paint the entire picture with the same dark brush would be to miss the nuances. Throughout history, there have been rare but significant exceptions, glimmers of humanity that show a different path was possible. One of the most striking contrasts comes from the ancient world. While Renaissance Europe often treated dwarfs as curiosities, ancient Egypt held a remarkably different view. In Egyptian society, particularly during the Old Kingdom, individuals with dwarfism could be respected and hold positions of high status. Their condition was often seen as a celestial gift associated with powerful deities like Bes and Ta. The most famous example is Seneb, a high-ranking official who lived around 2500 BC. Seneb was a man of immense wealth and power, holding prestigious titles and buried in a grand tomb near the pyramids at Giza. The famous statue of Seneb and his family radiates warmth, dignity, and familial unity. Seneb is portrayed as a respected husband, loving father, and powerful man. While not all people with dwarfism in Egypt enjoyed such privilege, with many working as jewelers or attendants, the example of Seneb proves that a society could see dwarfism not as a flaw, but as a different form of humanity. Even within the often brutal world of European monarchies, there were instances of genuine affection. A touching example comes from 16th century Sweden, from the court of Queen Catherine Jagiellon. Catherine had a close confidant named Dorothea Astrelska, a woman with dwarfism known affectionately as Desichka. Desichka was not a pet, she was a trusted friend. Their bond was so strong that when Catherine was imprisoned, Desichka was one of the few attendants she was allowed to keep with her. When Catherine became queen, Desichka remained her favorite confidant, a constant and trusted presence. Their relationship appears to have been one of true companionship, transcending the cruel prejudices of the time. In other courts, some dwarfs were given formal employment and even titles. In Sweden, a court dwarf named Andersbin was ennobled. In England, Richard Gibson, a contemporary of Jeffrey Hudson, was a successful miniature painter for King Charles I and a drawing master to future queens. He and his wife, who also had dwarfism, had 9 children and appear to have lived with a level of professional respect and personal freedom denied to many others. These stories are vitally important, proving that dehumanization was a choice, not an inevitability. The journey through the forgotten lives of royal people with dwarfism takes us into the shadows of history. It reveals a world of profound suffering, breathtaking cruelty, and, in rare moments, surprising humanity. The stories of Jeffrey Hudson, the boy served in a pie of Isabella d'Este's nameless daughter, given away as a gift, of Joseph Boruwoski, forced to exhibit himself, and of Desichka, the loyal friend, are not mere historical footnotes. They are powerful testaments to the human spirit's capacity for both cruelty and resilience. Their fates were dictated by the values of their time. In an era when monarchy was a performance of divine perfection, their very existence was seen as a flaw in the script. Dynastic pride led to a culture of secrecy and erasure. Many were hidden away, their lives lived in silence. Others were kept in the public eye but stripped of their dignity, transformed into living spectacles for the court's amusement. They were props, pets, and property. Yet, this isn't just a story of victimhood. It's also a story of survival. It's the story of Jeffrey Hudson's fierce attempt to demand respect and Joseph Boruwoski's lifelong struggle to be seen as a man of feeling. And it's the story of the quiet dignity of Seneb in ancient Egypt and the unwavering loyalty of Desichka in Sweden, reminders that a different world was always possible. These stories force us to confront uncomfortable truths about how easily society can dehumanize those who are different. The gilded halls of royal palaces, so often romanticized, were for these individuals prisons of shame or stages for humiliation. By remembering them, we are restoring the dignity that was so cruelly denied. Their lives, though lived in the shadows, are a powerful reminder that true worth is not found in a flawless bloodline or a perfect portrait, but in the unwavering recognition of the humanity of every single individual. The echoes of their forgotten lives still linger, urging us to listen, to remember, and to never again allow a person's worth to be measured by their stature. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the hidden corners of royal history. If you believe these forgotten stories deserve to be told, please subscribe to our channel and join our community dedicated to uncovering the past. We'll see you in the next video.